I thought it was really funny, which is why I bought it. First reason, just like it was funny. We were Comedy Central and we needed something funny. I thought it's so outrageous. It's going to get us a lot of attention either way, whether good or bad. So, and what Comedy Central needed most then was some attention because we were trying to build distribution. So I said, if it fails, it's going to fail spectacularly. It's going to go down in flames, but at least everybody will have heard of Comedy Central.
Welcome to the Media Machine, where media, business, and innovation intersect. Hello, I'm your host, Johanna Salazar. Join me each week as we examine the future of content, technology, and entertainment through the lens of four key pillars: process, profits, people, and planet. Through insightful conversations with visionaries, disruptors, and pioneers, the Media Machine unpacks the challenges and opportunities shaping the next era of media. In today's episode, we will speak with Doug Herzog, a luminary who has navigated media's evolution across decades. From transitioning and transforming MTV's programming to pioneering Comedy Central's iconic shows, Doug's impact in media is unparalleled. His leadership spans from traditional networks to digital realms, and his passion for mentoring emerging talent has further solidified his legacy. Doug, welcome.
Thank you so much. So I'm really happy to be here.
So you went from radio to cable TV, and I do want to focus on the future of content consumption and hear all your thoughts on that. But I do want to start from the back and think about what drove you and your thinking around programming. So you launched a reggae show on your college radio station back in the day, which became immensely popular. Could you share more about your experience producing that show and how it contributed to your understanding of audience engagement and programming?
Wow, I'm not sure I was thinking about any of that back then as a college student in 1978. I just wanted to be on the radio station at my college. I loved music. I was interested in trying to, at that point, I don't know what I was thinking about a career, but I was interested in, media. I was interested in TV and radio and movies and music, and I was just trying to sort of figure it all out. And they had a great radio station at my college, Emerson College in Boston. I had become a reggae fan in high school and, a couple of years before 1975. And, reggae in those days was kind of an exotic, obscure thing. And it was very tough to break onto the radio station. It was a very popular station. It was a very powerful station, very influential station. It was one of those really great college radio stations you read about from the 70s and 80s. And they didn't have a reggae show. Hardly anybody did in those days. And I remember I pitched the idea to it was student run back in those days. It no longer is. And I got a slot on the weekends to do a reggae show, and I really embraced it and jumped into it and had a lot of fun doing it. And it was a great market for that music. College students were a big market for that kind of music, and there was a big West Indian community in the Boston area, and so it kind of took off, and it was really fun. And then before long, it became a daily show. I left Emerson in end of 1980, but the show ran for like 35 years. It was a sort of a mainstay of the station for a really long time. So when people ask, what's the thing I'm most proud of? Is it the Daily Show or South Park or this thing or that thing? I always say my college radio show, because that one I did all by myself versus, everything else that I did in my career, which, I was part of the big team.
I loved hearing that. And it just humanized you so much. I loved it. And what do you think, when you look back at that and you got your first job in programming, how did that impact that path, would you say?
Well, one of the things I did do at the radio station, as so I started with the show, and then I did become the music director there, mostly to, honestly, if I'm being honest, to get the free records and the free concert tickets. Again, as a college student and a big music fan, but it put me into a management role and a leadership role, and I sort of like that. And I would not have predicted that for my career necessarily. I don't know what I was thinking at that time. I think I thought I was going to be a TV producer. I'm not sure I even knew what that meant then. And if you looked at my high school yearbook, it said I wanted to be a film director, and this was 1977, and I guess I wanted to be some combination of Robert Altman or Woody Allen, when it was still cool to be Woody Allen. I got to Emerson, and I just got involved in a lot of different things. And then I did, my first opportunities coming out of Emerson were as a producer at these fledgling cable networks. So
Hmm.
starting with CNN, where I was literally I was at CNN, not in Atlanta, I was in their LA bureau the day they launched, so that sort of dates me and let you know how old I am. Um, and I only fell into the management and leadership thing a few years later when I got the opportunity to go to MTV at 25 and start their news department, or at the time what it was called Music News. And and I was 25 and had the opportunity to build the department and, manage a bunch of people and, lead a group. And like I said, I wasn't something I could have told you I wanted to do, but when I got the opportunity to do it, I was like, I think I'm in the right place and I think I'm doing the right thing. And, I just sort of took to it. When I got to MTV in 1984, MTV had launched in 1981. It was, for those of you who are too young to remember, which is probably most of who's ever listening to this, MTV just played videos in the old days. That's really what they did. That was what music television was. That you'll still hear people complain that MTV doesn't play music. They haven't for 35 years, but that's what it was. And then we started adding some news to the mix, which in almost like a radio kind of format. There were two news breaks an hour. And I don't know, about 1986, 87, Bob Pittman, who was one of the founders and was leading MTV at that point, we were starting to get real cable distribution. You got to remember, this is also, if you're old enough to remember the 80s, not everybody had cable. It took a while for it to
Hmm.
reach, maximum distribution, which it finally did probably in the 90s for some of the bigger channels. But we're starting to get some distribution. I don't know, who knows? Maybe we're in 30 million plus homes at this point. We're starting to get rated. We have advertisers, obviously. And the research started to show that, people would change the channel a lot. Because maybe they didn't like the Cyndi Lauper video that came after the Duran Duran video. So we wanted to keep people around longer and more consistently. We didn't call it engagement in those days. We just called it keeping people around longer. So Bob Pittman decided we would make half-hour programs, which I remember being in the room when he announced this. It was like heresy, at least to most of the people in the room. Most of the people at MTV and the viewers of MTV were very, very serious about this is about music and music only. And Bob wanted us to make a game show, a news show, and a dance show. And so beyond the fact that we were going to make, sort of quote conventional TV shows, we're going to make a game show. Like that's the most old fashioned, type of, like what's cool about that? So the challenge was to go out and make these shows and make them cool.
So, as the original architect of The Daily Show, could you take us back to the inception of the show? How did you envision it as a cornerstone for Comedy Central and a reason for viewers to tune in regularly? And what I'm really interested about or on is, were you guys, was it as data driven then as it is today? Were your decisions data driven?
And so I got to Comedy Central in 1995 after a great long run at MTV from 84 to 95. So about 11 years. And I got this opportunity, I was sort of like the number two person at MTV to great Judy McGrath.
Mm-hmm.
And, this opportunity came up at Comedy Central, which is a business that we half owned. The other half of the time was owned by Time Warner. And it was a fledgling comedy channel that it was born out of two failed comedy channels, one of Viacom's, one of Time Warner's. Cable operators said, this isn't working. They both stink. We only want one comedy channel. We're not interested in a comedy war. So you guys figure it out. So they merged and formed Comedy Central, and it kind of bounced around for a couple of years. And then I got the call, would you be interested in this? And I was. So when I got to Comedy Central, it had a couple of original programs, a lot of reruns, a lot of crappy reruns, a lot of crappy movies. And I just was watching the network and I sort of got the feeling that, if you watched Comedy Central on Monday, there wasn't really a big reason to watch it on Tuesday. It's just all the same crap. And, MTV, I'd come from, MTV and the news department, and MTV was like this living, breathing entity, this platform that, was changing every day and kind of communicating with the audience every day. And you had to watch it every day. You had to be part of the conversation. And I felt like at Comedy Central, we needed to capture some of that and create a conversation around ourselves. So how can we do that? Well, the biggest thing going in the mid 90s on cable and to a certain degree television, was SportsCenter on ESPN. It was hosted by Dan Patrick and Keith Olbermann, and it was a huge ratings hit. This is before the internet and before you could get all the scores and every piece of information, every highlight on your phone. You had to watch ESPN each night to get all the scores and the highlights. And these guys made it fun and they made it interesting and they really turned it into a thing. It was very highly rated. They were on the cover of TV Guide. And I thought, well, how do we sort of capture that? What's the sports center for Comedy Central? Bill Maher was leaving. He was hosting something called Politically Incorrect, which was on every night and was news oriented, but wasn't doing particularly well. And I thought we need our own sports center. So I conjured up this idea of a show that we would do every night that would be part Sports Center, part Saturday Night Live Weekend Update, part Howard Stern, part Today Show. I had all these different ideas rolling around, but I basically came up with a framework and a format of like, we need to be different every night. We need to give our point of view on what's happening every day and make this a destination for people to get like the humorous point of view on what happened during the day. And we should be those people. So, Johnny Carson's monologue was a big inspiration because that's sort of how it was done in those days. And I thought, well, we'll do headlines, news headlines to start, and we'll sort of capture the day. Then we'll do like an interview because we don't have to write it and we can book it and it won't cost us anything. And then we should do like a tape piece, some kind of funny tape piece. So that was the broad sketch of the idea. And I kind of got everybody on board. We went, out to the town. And in those days, Comedy Central and cable weren't taken seriously by the agents and the managers. And we weren't paying a lot of money. And, all the money was in, network television, and people weren't spending that kind of money on cable. And everybody said, you can't do this. You can't afford to do this. You have to have a lot of writers. You don't have the wherewithal to keep this going 5 nights a week for 52 weeks a year. And to a certain extent, we were right. We didn't know how we were going to actually pay for it, but I just knew it's what we had to do. I sort of decided it was our manifest destiny. And the first person I approached was a woman named Madeline Smithberg, who I knew who had produced the Jon Stewart show on MTV for us. And Madeline turned me down for all the reasons I just said. She said, no, we're not doing it. And then I went and talked to a million other people who also turned us down. And then I went back to Madeline. I said, you're going to do this. I'm going to make you do this. And my deal with her was, we're not going to do a pilot. We're just going to put it on the air and go for it. And I'm going to keep it on the air for at least a year. And we're going to figure this out because it's what we have to do. So if we don't get it right,
Netflix.
if we don't get it right, we're just going to stay at it till we get it right. And the truth is, we got lucky, and coming out of the gate, we kind of got it right. It started with Craig Kilborn. It was a very different show than Jon Stewart's, but it, got some attention and some buzz, and it built from there. And so we were certainly lucky in that regard. But going back to your data question, before we actually put the show on the air, we didn't do a pilot, but in the weeks leading up to the premiere, we were doing practice shows, just trying to get it right before we got on the air. So we weren't airing them. We were just, for about 2 weeks, we did a show every night as if we were doing the show, just to kind of get it on its feet, work it out before we were going to put it on the air. So we edited together basically a pilot that we took to a focus group because we figured, let's get some feedback from the audience. See what
Did
they
you
said.
have a live audience or no?
So in the beginning, we didn't. That's another story. I wanted a live audience. Madeline and Liz, who were the producers, said, no, this is supposed to be a news parody, and news shows don't have audiences. I'm like, okay, I get it, but this is a comedy show, and we need people to laugh at the jokes. So we did not start with an audience. That's another story. But we took it out to the focus group, and they hated it. They hated it with a red hot hate. Wow. And we sat in that focus group room across, on the other side of the mirror. We were crestfallen. And so when it all ended, we looked around the room, we looked at each other. People were like, well, what do we do? And my attitude was, well, either they're wrong or we're wrong. And I go, I think they're wrong. I go, and like I said, we're going to do this till we figure out how to get it right. And so I just said, forge on, we're going, let's go.
That's amazing.
And we just, kind of ignored the focus group and went on. We probably did the show for about 3 weeks without an audience, and I hated it. And then I said, Madeline, we got to figure out how to do this with an audience. And so I rented another studio and we set up a show. We brought everybody over from the staff like in the middle of the afternoon one day, and we just ran through a show that we had done the night before in front of a live audience. And about 3 minutes in, Madeline and Liz came and said, "You're right. Of course, we need an audience. We need
Wow.
to hear people laughing." And that was that. So,
That's
look, a lot of
amazing.
this, yeah, it's all, well, look, but a lot of this other stuff, you follow your instincts and just hope to get lucky. But I am a big believer that if you tell jokes, you need an audience to laugh at them.
What about South Park? I mean, that became a cultural phenomenon.
A woman named Debbie Liebling, who was our development lead in Los Angeles. I had come out to LA on one of my, regular trips, and she said, "I have to show you something." And she put this tape into a machine, and she showed me this short, which people might know is the original South Park short was called "The Spirit of Christmas," or was also known as "Jesus versus Santa." And she played it for me, and I thought, "Oh my God, that's the funniest thing I've ever seen. Uh, can we, let's play that again." And she did. And I was like, okay, we have to be in business with these guys. I don't think we can do that. Now you got to remember, this is the mid 90s. And I think the edgiest things on television, again, you have to really bring yourself back, were The Simpsons, Married with Children, maybe Beavis and Butthead. But that was the line. That was the edgy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And, it wasn't like it is today. The envelope had not been pushed. And so I said, I don't think we can do that, but we should be in business with those guys, and we should do the show. And we convinced them to come to Comedy Central, because we did convince them we would let them do the show they wanted to do. We had nothing to lose. It kind of changed everything. And ultimately, and almost from the beginning, they did do that. I mean, the show was so outrageous and so over the top and pushed the envelope in a way that had never been done before, and was smart and funny, which were the most important things, that it took off like a rocket, and it never looked back. And they're still doing it 27 years later.